Now that you have your basic pattern piece cut out, your front, we're going to trace it on another piece of paper because you don't want to ruin your original. And I'm going to go ahead and use the darker pen so you can see. But when I do this, I'm adding another 1/16 of an inch to that front edge. So I need to cut that off and make sure that you know that that's a bad example. Okay, so I'm tracing around it carefully. If you hold the pen and you push it up against the side, I'm not putting a lot of pressure on it, but I am pushing against the pattern piece. So it's easier if you try to do it all in one long smooth stroke rather than a bunch of little ones. So touching, and I'm pushing the pen slightly against the edge of the paper. I don't want to wrinkle it, I just want it to stay on the edge of the paper, and I'm holding the paper down so it doesn't move. Okay, so my bust point is here. When you've got a single dart, you can make that fit wedge go all the way to the bust point. And I'm calling this a fit wedge because it's not technically a dart. It's what's folded out on the dress form when you're making the pattern. And in order to turn this into a sewable dart, what you'll need to do is measure the dart opening. But we'll wait until we move that. So right now this is just a fit wedge. The first place I'm going to put it is, and I've never heard anybody else call it a fit wedge, so when you get to your next class up, know that your teacher will have a different term for it. It will probably be dart or sewable dart. So I'm going to mark, I've got 2.5, so I'm going to mark 1 1/4, and that's my center. If you are uncomfortable with fractions and measuring, you can just line another piece of paper up next to it and fold it in half and just mark the center that way. Okay, so we've traced it off. We know where our bust point is, and we're going to move the dart from the waistline to going into the shoulder. So I'm going to draw a little picture of that. So I've got my outline pictures that you can print out on canvas, and they look very similar to this with the bust point there. Instead of what I had on the previous one, which was the dart coming straight up from the waist, this time it's going to be coming down from the shoulder, right where I drew it here. So to move it, we're going to do something called slash and spread. And you can, oh, I left out the A. You can read about that in chapter 4 near the beginning of chapter 4, and then all of the things that I'm going to show you how to do this week and next week are in chapter 4. But you don't absolutely have to have the book yet, so if you need to order it, you've got a while before you absolutely have to have it. Oh. Sorry about that. Okay, so for slash and spread, I've marked where I want the dart to be, so I'm going to cut carefully down that line. And if you've used a nice sharp pencil, it will be a little bit more accurate. And I'm going to cut to the bust point and stop, because I want to keep it slightly attached. Then I can cut either dart leg, either line that goes, that's part of this dart. I'm going to cut this one, and I'm going to cut a straight line from the outer edge to the bust point again, and then stop. So I want it to be just barely attached, like a little loose tooth, and I don't know whether you can see it or not, but the paper's wrinkling slightly, which means I haven't cut far enough. If I cut too far and it separates, it's not the end of the world. So that's better. So now I'm going to rotate this so that the original dart is closed, and I'll line those two lines up so that they're just barely on top of each other and touching. And now I have a new dart that has opened up in the shoulder, and that's how it's going to end up looking like this picture. So I'm going to open it back up again and get my glue stick, and I usually will put the glue down the side that I'm going to stick down. Make it nice and secure, and then I'll rotate that line closed, start from the center and smooth it out. And sometimes this lines up exactly where it belongs, and sometimes it's a little bit jagged, and that's what you'll use your curve for. And I will be sure and have one of those next time we meet for videos. But this is nice and smooth. If one of them was up or down, you would just split the difference and blend one side into the other. And while we're on that, I'd like to point out that all of the lines that are on the corners are right angles. So if I line this ruler up on top of this line, then it's going to show through and be a right angle there for just a little bit. And it should right here too, and you will see that when it's joining the back. So the bottom of the armpit, the side seam to the waist is going to be a right angle. So is the center front and center back. Those are right angles. And it'll talk about that in the book. I've never been really satisfied with the explanation they give of why. And then this one is 90% of the time this is a right angle. This is seldom if ever a right angle. But when it joins the back, the combination between where this line goes and this line goes, they total 180, which is half of 90. I mean, 90 plus 90. So you'll still get a smooth curve right there. If you don't have two right angles, so the way this front would come together right here, there's a 90-degree angle on each side, so the bottom is a smooth curve. And when you're looking at a waistline seam, as it goes around the body, so you're looking at like a waistline here, the way this goes around the body, because the body is circular, every line that crosses into that and comes from the outer edge of the circle is a 90-degree angle from the edge of the circle right here, which means you're going to get a smooth line that goes around there. And I don't think that's sunk in for me very well for a really long time. So if you don't understand that, just put it on the shelf and it will eventually make sense. Just know that you need to have right angles on the corners so that you have smooth curves. That would be a great quiz question. 90-degree angles so that you have smooth curves. Okay, so back to our dart. I need to fill some paper in behind this to make it a real dart. So I'm going to turn this over, and I want to make sure I use plenty of glue because I want it to stick really well. So I'm going to put glue all the way up to the edge, and you can stop the video while you do this and then come back if you want to, or listen to it a few times. That's the beauty of having videos. I'm just disappointed that I don't get to hang out with you and see you understand things. It's part of the fun thing about teaching. It's getting to meet people. Okay, so I have filled in the dart, so it's not an empty space. I have to have that there so that I can sew it together. But I need to turn it into an actual sewable dart. So to do that, I'm going to measure the opening of the dart, and it's different everywhere it ends up around the pattern. So you want to measure it every time. So I'm centering the ruler over where it would be 3, so I'm putting my center at 1.5 inches. And then I'm going to draw a line from the bust point through that line, and I'm going to put another mark 1/2 inch away from the bust point. That is going to help me put ease in the pattern. If you were to sew this dart all the way to the bust point and back out, then you would have a very pointy dart. It would be like the one that's in the Madonna costumes from the 80s. I will probably post a picture of Madonna in her costume in the 80s on canvas, because sadly some of you are so young you're not familiar with that. But typically we don't want really pointy darts. So I'm drawing a new line from my corner of the outer edge of the dart to the end point of where I'm going to sew my dart. So this is the sewable point, and this becomes ease. This area that I'm highlighting in blue is ease. That's released fabric that keeps it from hugging the body so tightly that it doesn't look as nice. So I'll write that down. Ease. You don't have to color that. I colored it so that you can see it. And one of the next things I'll want to do is add seam allowance. And because I've got a gridded ruler and I can follow these lines, I don't have to measure all the way around the outer edge like you would on a regular ruler. I'm going to measure, and I'm going to switch ends. Hopefully you'll be able to see this, but that's so fat. So I'm measuring out 1/4 inch. And I'm just kind of doing dot to dot on the curves. I won't do that on my center front, but do you see how I'm lining this up right here and I'm putting a right angle? So even the seam allowance is coming at a right angle, because if the seam allowance isn't, and you sew that together, when you sew it, the seam edge of the seam allowance is really going to determine where the seam goes. I mean, where the stitching line goes. Okay, so add your seam allowance there, and I'm going to leave extra space out here, but I'm going to cut some of that paper away. And in chapter 4, there's a page in the book that talks about which way the dart flap is supposed to lay. And if you've ever looked inside of a blouse that has a dart in it, the flap is folded toward the center. So you want this part to end up toward the center. Sometimes I, on purpose, fold them the other way, but I usually have a reason when I do that. There might be some kind of a design thing. So you want to be sure and fold the dart flap the way you want it to end up when it's sewn. And the traditional way is toward the center, or if it's a horizontal dart, it would fold down and I will have a picture of the page that is in the book that shows that, so that you know which page I'm talking about. And that will be something that's really important to keep in mind for the next pattern making class. So because I want my dart flap to come toward the center, I'm going to fold on this dart line. And I have one little YouTube video that is just folding a dart. One on a curved seam and one on a straight seam. And you can just watch that over and over. But the way I fold this, I want to fold from the corner down to the point right here, not in the blue area, but to the end of this dart. So I'm folding this. So I'm going to lay it over the other way and roll it backward. And I'm starting by creasing that very edge right there. And then I'm going to skip, and I'm going to come over and fold right there at the point on the same line. I don't want to crease past my sewable dart point. I don't want to come to here, I'm coming to here. Then once I've got both of those creased, I'm going to kind of hold the paper back and crease the whole thing from the center out. And the closer I get exactly to that line edge, the easier it's going to be to finish. In the book, it describes this as close and cup. So the next thing I'm going to do is push down on the paper and it pops up the other direction. And when I do that, I find it easier to have the fold away from me. So I'll pop it up, and then I will bring that folded edge over toward the other one. And you can see how they're not quite lined up yet, but I'm going to bring them together exactly. When I've got them exactly lined up on top of each other, I'm going to come over and smooth out the center. I don't want to fold the center in advance. I just want to mash it down after I've got it into this position. While I'm here in this position, I'm going to hold the paper where it is. If it helps you to put a little piece of tape on it, go ahead and do that. So right here, can you see how, I don't want to make you nauseous. I could maybe use the zoom feature, but I think you can see how there's a dip right here. So if I draw a new line from the exact corner to the exact corner, there's a little section right here that was missing, because when that dart got folded, it's just slightly different. If I left that line there so that it was curved, then my back shoulder that sews to this and attaches to it would get pulled forward slightly, and it would create some weird wrinkling happening on the back or possibly the front. So you always want to draw a new line from one corner to the other corner on a straight line and have it be perfectly straight between the two. You don't want to finish the trajectory of this line, because then you would lose some of your neck space and then your collar wouldn't fit anymore. So you always want to go corner to corner. Another excellent quiz question. While I'm in this position, I'm going to move the ruler over and line it up so that I can add my seam allowance to the edge. And there's as many ways as there are people to do this. The book says to use a tracing wheel or a pinwheel, and I never do that, but you can. So when I've got it in this position, I'm going to just cut it off. And I've still got some dart flap here that's disappearing behind the neck. So I'm going to cut that off too. Because what I'm doing right now is determining the shape of the dart end. That's not something you can guess. It's something you discover while you're cutting. Another good test question. Determining the shape of the dart end is not something you can guess. It's something you determine while you're cutting or using your pinwheel. Alright, now I'm going to open the dart, and that's the shape of my dart end, because this part goes into the neck, and this part follows the edge of where it goes when it's sewn. Now look at what happens if I went the other way. So when you turn these in, if you go the wrong way, I'll know. I've been teaching this class for more years than I want to count, and I'll recognize that. So make sure you fold it toward the neck and trim all of that out. And then to finish this, you will add, ooh, we're getting into 20 minutes. That's going to be a long download. You will add your seam allowance. Should I do seam allowance on another video? Okay, the next video will be about seam allowance and finishing this up.